Hi everyone, thanks for joining. I'm Yannick from Symphony, early members of FINOS and early adopters of FDC3. And today with me I've got Matthew from NatWest Markets, also very early adopters of FDC3. I'm not going to present FDC3 because it's 2025, and B, Juliana just gave a very good presentation of what the basics are. So we're going to cut straight to the chase and talk about how identity and security can help FDC3 move forwards and why we need the identity and security stream and what we've been doing these past nearly 2 years now on identity and security. So, thanks, Chris. You've all seen this diagram, and by now everyone knows how FDC3 can make internal interop easy. You're in-house, you've got a desktop agent you've either built in-house or you've purchased from a vendor. You've got a whole load of apps which are all connected to the same internal identity provider, and you use FDC3 as the linkage between those apps to give you a kind of seamless user experience internally. Great, problem solved. It's something that you guys have used to great success at NatWest Markets.
Yep, so hello everyone, I'm Matt Harvey, so I'm Global Head of Electronic Sales and Product Development for NatWest. I am a semi-technical user at best, at least two people in the room can testify to that, but I've got my bodyguard Chris, who we managed to tempt here into NatWest, sitting in the audience, so I'm confident I can talk through the topic. So I think we're going to talk mostly about the external imperative and the identity problem, but I just thought I'd recap on where we got to with the internal implementation. So to contradict Juliana, whose energy I will never, ever be able to replicate as someone from the Midlands with a Birmingham accent, the kind of situation at NatWest was very much, particularly post-MiFID, with all of the increased information capture required around workflows, particularly pricing execution, we had a bit of a mix of install, non-install apps, a lot of legacy technology hanging around that had a very important place to play in that workflow. All told, in summary, there's about 22 pieces of information that someone would need to look at in some way, shape or form. That could be reg-related or for commercial reasons, look at recent history with the client. And so there was a need to either fundamentally re-engineer the workflow, which would involve some application consolidation, or stitch together a bunch of applications that some of which were pretty fit for purpose, things to do pre-trade checking for clients, credit checking, summarize the last events with the client, capture timestamps in line with the MiFID requirements that landed in 2018, something to kind of stitch that together to make the workflow better so that all the information could be considered and new information captured. So it kind of came from a control mechanism, but obviously there's a massive user experience angle to also doing that. And so what you see here is kind of impossible, and gave up trying to replicate it on a slide, especially with having to blur out everything that's interesting on a slide to you. But it's kind of impossible to show the interactive desktop. But if I wave my hands around enough, you kind of appreciate an incoming chat from a client, some kind of client context is set, some kind of instrument context is set, and then that's enough information to launch into contextually aware workflow with other applications. So what you've got on screen here is a coverage dashboard on the top left. It's one of our internal tools. So it's built on Data IQ. So I'm going to focus on slightly different technologies here. that kind of shows where the client is in terms of production versus how much effort we're expending on the client. So when a client comes in, it's good to see that at that point in time, to see if we're over underperforming, and maybe need to spend a bit more time with them, maybe we need to set up another meeting with them. On the top right, you've got HTML5 application, so homegrown, that sits on top of KDB, summarizes an awful lot of information around what kind of client flows are valuable to us, and perhaps where we're underperforming and we've got a service issue to address. A really simple one, next one down on the right, is the 10 most recent inquiries with a client. So something that's particularly important if you've got some of our more price-sensitive clients on the phone, and the thing you're just picking up, you want to know if we've missed kind of the last 9 out of 10 inquiries for the customer. And then on the bottom right, you've got a Salesforce implementation CRM, and the bottom left, you've got a vendor BI tool, so ClickSense. So all of that and much more, and actually we missed the .NET application, which kind of is the key information capture tool, the sales trader workflow tool that we really needed to stitch together because of MiFID requirements, and led to the construction of Backplane and ultimately the contribution to FINOS, where we won the All-In Award, actually, I think, in 2022. Thanks, FINOS, for that contribution. So internally, hopefully in a reg sense and a workflow sense, it's kind of understood. There's nothing too much to sell there. Part of the reason also was to retain optionality for putting components in externally. And that's kind of where FDC3 was a bit of a no-brainer for us. So as a key enabler internally, great. On the basis that our customers might be interested in things like last 10 inquiries and things I can't put on the screen. Let's pretend there's like about 25 applications that are contextually aware. Then it would be good to retain some optionality on how they interact. Obviously, it's not just put it external and it talks, I know that. But at the same time, if the interoperability standards and the intents that are supported are consistent, the hope is it would lower the barrier to entry and we can start putting that externally within some desktop implementations. The final thing to hopefully segue into Yannick, by the way, it makes complete sense to be here talking with Symphony, because I think the first things on the desktop that were contextually aware was if anyone went to Symphony Innovate, I think in 2020 in New York, where we launched our Scoutbot on Symphony to try and capture some of this voice or RFQ, prepare a payload, and then send it into our sales trader workflow tool. The first thing was that Symphony bot workflow, which kind of makes sense. But to segue into the kind of external piece, internally, we're obviously very happy with the identity of everyone that's using these applications. And not necessarily from an authentication perspective, just a tacit identity. We're very happy with that. And the reason why the first external interaction was that Symphony-based bot is we're also happy leaning on Symphony's identity of a particular user. Once again, not in an authenticated sense, but to make sure that at least it's someone that, if we are questioned, we can understand why we were happy to put an indicative rate in front of that client, and it's not someone completely outside the industry that a regulator might say, we are soliciting into interest rate swap execution, etc., etc. Externally, we've kind of got that gap, which I think is where we've stalled a little bit. We've got this external process break that we introduce, where we then have to stop someone in this fantastic interoperable journey that we have internally and wait to identify them and perhaps over-authenticate them.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, exactly. So internal interop, can say it's a solved problem. External is a lot harder. There's the question of every application provider needs to decide and define if they want to work, if their application should interop with another application provider. There's questions on identity, as Matt pointed out, for a whole load, without even talking about actually logging in, but just having a traceability and a control over the identity of a user and what type of category the user is in. And on top of that, everyone, from the user to the app developers, everyone needs to trust whatever desktop agent is powering it all behind the scenes, because everything's going through the desktop agent. So it needs to be the most trusted component. So all of that brings a lot of friction. The question now is, how can we reduce this friction? So to come back to what you were saying, Matthew, this is what you're aiming for externally, and in fact, pushing this out, you've seen a lot of friction, and things have gone a lot slower than they have internally, right?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. So this is I have the benefit of working in the logical world compared to most people here who actually have to implement stuff. But this was a logical overview of what we thought the future composite desktop looked like. I've taken a lot of names off. Everyone could probably guess a lot of the names that would persist. But essentially, our Agile Markets platform, which is our single dealer platform, every bank representative will have a variant of that, we see as being something that you don't have to bring up as a single container and authenticate. I speak to clients all the time that want a part of our single dealer, but definitely won't dedicate a large part of their screen real estate to another single dealer on their platform. So one of our secret sources is a component called Gamma Hedger. It helps you manage and hedge go forward FX options. And I spoke to an API, one of the most famously API first clients, about getting access to this tool, and actually they hit a point where they said, do you know, we would take your component, your UI component, if we didn't have to bring up the whole of Agile Markets, because actually developing the UI internally or working with one of our EMS or OMS vendors to sit on top of your API, you've done an awful lot of UX, and we have, to make this thing usable. It's a fairly complicated component. And net, it would probably be more attractive if it could just land on our desktop and be part of our integrated desktop, and we would use it. So hopefully that kind of describes a little bit of the vision. There are definitely some of the simple use cases that I've probably over-talked to a number of people in the room about, at both this institution and former institutions. There are also use cases where you could see across those components, so Agile Markets, for example, versus some of the client-specific order management system, execution management system providers on the top left, where it would be nice to be able to give some of our clients some market data or support, and also kind of funnel them or tiptoe them into using our single dealer platform. So there's a joint benefit to be had there. Customers tell me an awful lot that they have to pay a lot for market data and insights. And even from publicly available market data sources, we have a lot of that data lying around. And if we could present it to them at the right point in the workflow, that would be beneficial to them. So as a very simple example of what I'm saying, imagine a client in one of the big three order management systems hovering over a line in their blotter, and our spot liquidity tile opens up in context to show them the current streaming indicative rate of that particular pair. Or equally, any particular asset class involved in one of those blotter rows. So that's the kind of vision, and for that use case to happen, we don't need indicative rates in a reg sense are capable of being put in front of most people, as long as we understand who the individual is, or we're able to demonstrate a little bit of understanding on who the individual is, and that we've taken reasonable efforts to make sure we're not making them available to my 15-year-old son and tempting him into OTC derivatives, for example, which he wouldn't be interested in, but as a kind of example. So yeah, that's really, we've hit this blocker. In that example, the client isn't going to put up with a login screen, log into Agile Markets to get that kind of very small value add indicative rates when they hover over a line in their blotter in one of their order management systems. We probably all know that. So then we need to solve the problem.
Exactly. So I think we've made it abundantly clear why we needed the identity and security working group. What we did at the beginning of this working group is try and boil down these problems we've been talking about into a simple use case. So the use case we chose was a request for pre-trade information. So a buy using multiple single dealer platforms, for example, and putting a request in to get margin requirements on an instrument. Okay, so something, as soon as you see this, you know how you'd do it with FDC3. You'd send an intent out, or maybe broadcast a context out, and you'd get back a reply from one or multiple sell-side applications. And already with that use case, which it's not an execution, there's no question of login, and yet there's already big questions around identity, right? Because the sell platforms don't want to be sharing this information out with competitors. They only want to reply to requests coming from a trusted application. On the other side, from the buy perspective, the fact that they're making this request is in of itself confidential. So they need to make sure that the request is not being sent out to every app running on their desktop, some of which might be operating at a much lower level of trust. So suddenly we've raised these questions of user identity and of application identity. To come back to something we presented at OSFF a year ago, we have this idea of a pyramid of trust. And basically, externally, today, FDC3 provides enough of a very, very basic layer, something quite generic that you can just blast out to all the applications running on your desktop. But we've got nothing, without even talking about the high-level trust stuff, like actually doing an execution, we've got nothing to solve the next layer up. And for that, we need identity. So all of these flows are predicated on the ability to share identity. App identity, user identity, and there's also the question of agent identity itself. So let's talk about the first one, which is app identity. So this is something that the working group has been working on, using the ideas of signed contexts and encrypted channels. That allows applications to guarantee what's coming in, because a signed context means myself as an application, I can verify the authenticity of what's coming in, and encrypted channels allows me to control who I'm sending out to. So with those two building blocks, we've already been able to do very interesting integrations, such as the demo we did at OSFF last year, the integration between Morgan Stanley's Matrix on the right and Wellington's order management system on the left. So both of these applications talking in a way which guarantees from both sides that they're only talking to the application they were designed for, and B, is done in a way that requires no trust whatsoever in the desktop agent, because in fact everything is going through an encrypted channel that's built in exactly the same way as an SSL connection is built between your web browser and a server, except it's two applications agreeing on each other's identity and encrypting communications for themselves. So that's what we've done on application identity. It's something that's the flow diagrams are there. We know how to implement it, and we're looking at getting some feedback before introducing it as a proposal for a future FDC3 standardization. The next topic we're looking at is user identity. And so for user identity, everything is going to revolve around identity tokens. So this mechanism of public keys that we've already introduced for signed contexts can also be used for applications to sign other attestations. So for example, an attestation on the identity of a user who's currently connected. So what that means is you can start having applications that consume identity, so which is a vast majority of applications. For example, let's take a charting app, for example, and you have applications that provide identity. So obviously, I've put Symphony, but that could be any application which is a communication provider can be used to provide identity. And what this means is that you can start unlocking external flows where your applications aren't all connected to the same single sign-on, but you can still have a signed attestation of the identity of who the user is, who they work for, what their role is, etc. So this is something we actually demonstrated at the FINOS BMO hackathon back in 2023. So I'll give you a very quick demo of what that can look like to kind of tease you what we'll be aiming for as a use case we can unlock. So I'm running here on a rather old desktop agent, which some of you in the room may recognize. And the idea is I'm going to open my Clever Deal application, which is actually pushing the envelope a bit by saying, you know what, I'm going to let you log in with another application. So what happens here is when I click login, it's going to send an intent out. Symphony as an application provider, as an identity provider application, can treat that intent, and in the reply can send back a signed token validating the user's identity. And that obviously can then be used once one application has the user's signed identity. It can then chain it on to further applications down the line. So something very simple, and obviously I'm pushing things a bit far here because we're actually logging in through FDC3. But the idea is to show that just by using this mechanism that we've already introduced for application identity around applications being able to sign things with agreed public keys, this allows us to go a lot further on the user identity space. The final identity one is agent identity, which becomes even more complicated now that we have agent bridging, now that we have web, FDC3 for the web, as Juliana was showing us before. We've managed to sidestep that one a bit by saying that all the flows we're looking at can require no trust in the desktop agent. Again, because applications can sign things, applications can verify signatures, everything can be encrypted so that the no trust in the desktop agent is required. So that allows us to sidestep the agent identity questions, which is something quite useful when you want to provide an FDC3 application without having complete control of where your end users are going to be running it. So everything we've shown you here today is a prototype. The suggested changes or improvements to the FDC3 specification are still they're still suggestions. Why? Because we need some feedback from the community. We need some feedback from the users to know, is this going to help you solve the problems you have. So what Rob, Chris, myself, all of us are really asking for you today is think about what your use cases are, think about what your issues, where you're getting the friction, exactly what Matthew was talking about earlier, and look at what we're suggesting and think about are these bricks what you need to build a solution. Rob has written a very complete white paper covering all of this and going even further in the reflection around circles of trust, etc. Also listing more of the use cases we've gone through. Please take the time to have a look at it and to see if that resonates, and then join the Identity and Security Working Group, pitch in for a meeting, just send us a message and share with us. There we go. Thank you. And we've even got a bit of time. Questions?
So, a question around if you've got multiple identity providers in your list of applications. What happens if you have two different identity tokens, and is the identity request just a normal intent where you get the app resolvers and you choose the identity provider you want to use?
So of course all of this is suggested, so everything's in the conditional, but yeah, that's the beauty of FDC3 is you can leverage the existing mechanisms for resolving intents. And so if you're running several applications that you have defined or in your application directory as treating identity, then you could choose which one to use.
If I'm receiving a Symphony message from somebody else on other apps, what you've shown doesn't do anything to confirm who's sending that Symphony message, or does it?
So in fact, in another hackathon, what we did is that Symphony would also pass on this. When you, on a Symphony message, you can register to trigger an FDC3 action from certain messages. And what we do is also pass the signed attestation for the person who sent that message.
In the form of a JWT
Yep.
or something?
Exactly. And that would then be passed on by FDC3. So the payload you'd get on FDC3, there's a signature saying this is coming from Yannick. And then there's another payload, and in that payload this was a message from Leslie, and here's the proof of that. Juliana.
How does the solution compare to using single sign-on or other solutions already on the market for logging into several applications at the same time?
That's a very good question. And this is rolling out single sign-on externally is extremely complicated, which is why we're getting all the friction on external interop, and which is why I started by saying on internal interop, we're kind of covered, and this is less useful because anyway, you're controlling what's running on your own users' desktops, and everyone's signed into the same single sign-on anyway. In an external flow, it's a lot more complicated, and there are all these use cases where single sign-on is a too big barrier for entry. It's not worth it for you're bringing a bit of extra value. You're never going to convince someone to roll out, to align their SSO systems just for that. But being able to prove in a trusted way their identity, what class of consumer they are, etc., would be worth it, and it's a lot cheaper. Chris.
Have you, or we, if we have, I've forgotten, done much work yet on how to verify the identities once you receive them?
So, whether it's app identities or user identities, it's verifying a standard JWT. One of the unanswered questions I until you asked the question I very artfully skirted around,
Sorry.
is where do you get these public keys from? Or where do you get these signatures from? It's something we thought a lot about with Rob. The first iterations are revolving around, I'm writing an app. On my app's configuration on my back end, I've put down where NatWest Market's public certificate is, and I know they sign all their things with that key. And I know where Symphony's is, I know where Microsoft's is, etc., etc. Obviously, that's a bit painful because every firm needs to have a list of every other firm's trusted keys. So there's a role there for FINOS somewhere, but we still need to define it. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you very much.